We have one more speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Larry Butler. Larry was he was on the original in the original meeting, and he worked with the Grazing Land Coalition from the beginning. And he was also had a full career with NRCS and a TV show. And now he has his own book. So when he finishes up here, he's going to tell you all about it. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm starting to wrestle a rough throat. I apologize for that. I'm not going to use the microphone because somebody else might need to talk into it later in case I've got something. I do have something. I just don't know what it is. If I was at home, I could ask my wife, and she'd tell me exactly what I've got.
Need some LA 300.
Yeah, there you go. But
Got some water under there.
I've got. Can we take that computer? You can just put it in my briefcase over here. That'd be fine. It's not mine, but we can take it. Okay. Sorry about that. All right, I'm used to these things. Okay, so we've heard a lot about where we are, GLC. We've heard a lot about where you can go with regional coalitions and other activities. I just felt like that it's been around a long time, and most of you don't know who started all this. And, the people. And it's kind of like my great-great-granddad. I never did know him either, but I know about him, and I've looked at my ancestry and all that stuff, and most of y'all probably have too. It's good to know where you come from. And that's why I wanted to talk today and give a tribute to the founders of the Grazing Land Conservation Initiative, now called the National Grazing Land Coalition. How did it start? Why? Who? Where? When? We know where we are today. Are we reinventing the wheel, or are we building a new and improved wheel? What are we doing? So that's for y'all to decide. I'm just going to tell you where we came from. So I want to set the stage for the circumstances that led up to the creation of the GLCI. And there was the 1985 Farm Bill, in which all of a sudden the farmers with highly erodible lands had to have a conservation plan, or they were going to lose their USDA benefits, which is a big deal. Well, the Soil Conservation Service, it's now NRCS, they had all these range conservationists that were really good planners. And so they said, let's use them. We need more people in the cropland area of these states, especially the highly erodible areas. I was in West Texas. There was a lot of highly erodible soils as you're going up in the Panhandle, and they stole a few of my field office range cons and moved them up to the Panhandle. And I predicted they'd never come back, and they haven't. And I tried to get the state conservationists at that time to let us have new employees. Go ahead and take our guys if that's what you got to do. And they were guys at the time, so I'm not being sexist. But go ahead and take them up there, get the job done, and give them back to me. But give me the new people. Let me train them in how you're supposed to do conservation planning. Because in that highly erodible land stuff, it was pretty much you had a check sheet, and you said, I'm going to do this, this, and this. Okay, sign right there. There's your plan. It was that simple in a lot of the high plains because there were so many people that needed to be qualified. The beginning of paper planning is what I called it at the time. But anyway, all these people moved away from the range areas of the state. Well, in September of 1988, there was a meeting. Somebody said, I'm not surprised, Larry, that you still have the program. 1988, there was a meeting in Fort Worth, Texas called Focused on the Future National Range Workshop. There was the chief of the NRCS there. There were all kinds of range specialists from our agency. There were ranchers from different parts of the country and SRM people, and the list goes on, and I've got notes written on this here and there and everywhere. All right, what happened at that meeting is they went through all these subjects. They looked at water quality, they looked at riparian areas, they looked at non-traditional uses, they looked at pesticides, endangered species, ranch tours. Remember that ranch tour, it's a pretty good one. Anyway, they looked at the industry needs and everything. But to me, the most important thing that happened at that meeting, it adjourned at 11:30 on this particular day, and they had open discussion and questions from the respondents for 30 minutes. It's not much time. But what happened during that 30 minutes, and I mentioned it in another meeting earlier, Barry Dunn is a rancher from South Dakota. And Barry was down at Kingsville, Texas. He was the first executive vice president for the Clayburgh Ranch Management Institute, which they still have now. And now, today, Barry is the president of South Dakota State University and doing a great job, I hear. Well, he gets up at that meeting and he said, okay, we've heard all this stuff about all these issues, and that's all good stuff. But when are you going to move those people back to the ranching sides of the country? When are we going to get our range conservationists back? And so he pretty much indicted the agency for not getting them back. Well, we were all range people, and we wanted them back too. But the leadership in Washington said, well, we can't get that done. So from that meeting in 1988 began the planning of the 1992 meeting in Bozeman, Montana. So not to slight the meeting in Bozeman, Bob, but it really started by a South Dakota guy in Fort Worth, Texas, saying, get on the ball and get our people back for helping us. So that's kind of where it started. When we got to Bozeman, I was a range conservationist for the western states. And when we got to Bozeman, we had about 100 ranchers invited there, but this was a rangeland issue. Had nothing to do with pasture land, grazed forest land, or anything. It was all rangeland to start with, because that's where the needs were identified. And as time went on, everybody began to realize the needs were much greater than just rangeland. They added the pasture land and grazed swamps, or wetlands you call it, all over the country. Well, the Soil Conservation Service sponsored that meeting, and it was pretty much led by some people. You were there, right? Yep. Yeah, I think you and I are the only two people in this room that were there. But we had small groups, about 10 ranchers and a couple of SCS guys. And we'd go off in a group and discuss problems. We'd be given a headline subject and discuss the issues. Come back as a big group and see where all those different groups had things in common. And as things went on, decided, we need to do something nationally to get people back on the land helping out with grazing management. And we had all these representatives from different entities like National Cattlemen and the sheep industry and others. But they couldn't just say, well, we'll do it. Those organizations have to have policy proposals and go through their committees at their meetings, and then they form a position statement and you yay or nay it in a vote. So the National Association of Conservation Districts and the Society for Range Management volunteered to serve as co-chairs to get that National Steering Committee, which is what today's board was called back then, the National Steering Committee. And the SCS appointed an interim coordinator to help with those meetings. And they had a couple of meetings. The whole job was to put together a strategic plan and missions and goals and all that. And there was a lot of things that just didn't happen the first couple of meetings. And that guy, that was the interim coordinator, wasn't a grazing specialist, didn't have any passion for it, as Tony would like to say. And so he stepped aside, and I'm sitting out there in the West, and they said, Larry, you're our next national coordinator. So I got that job, and we started working together. And that national committee was first, and I've got notes on all this at home. The original national committee for GLCI was the leadership and staff of these organizations: National Association of Conservation Districts, Society for Range Management, National Cattlemen's Association, now the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, American Farm Bureau Federation, American Sheep Industry, along with some ranchers, dairy producers, academia, research, and extension personnel all met together to work on this. The GLCI was, at that time at least, was the broadest base of national agricultural support of any initiative. And we didn't even have the pasture lands of the East in here yet. So I decided to try to contact those people. I'm going to tell you who they were. Most of them are deceased. Barney White from Paradise, Utah, was the NACD guy on the board, the committee. Robert Raskey was the NACD staff person. Mickey Killingsworth, who is still living, represented the American sheep industry, and Tom McDonald was the staff person for them. I tried looking her up, and she's been winning some awards and getting some honors. She just was inducted into the Farm Bureau Hall of Fame in Oregon. And I tried to call her, but I didn't reach her. Bud Purdy, who's deceased, is a rancher. Pete Jackson was deceased as the SRM Executive Vice President. Jack Maddox from Nebraska was a rancher and deceased now. John Roberts was an independent dairy producer from Vermont. I Googled him, and I found him, and I called him, and he says, wow, this many years has gone by, and you remembered my name? I said, John, I got notes all over the place about GLCI. So we had a great visit the other day, and he wished he could be here, but he was going to be at his daughter's house down in Texas during this week, which from Vermont to Texas, you'd think he could get by here, but anyway, he's still doing great. John Merrill, of course, has just recently passed away. He was on that committee representing the NCA, the National Cattlemen. Greg Ruley was a staff member from National Cattlemen, and Herb Manning from American Farm Bureau staff. That was the people working to make this happen. And the NRCS had a state conservationist advisory committee that frankly gave very little advice, but they were there. And I can say that since I became a state conservationist later in life, kind of have them part of this fraternity, I can criticize them. But anyway, the first meeting to put together, and yes, I have these too. This is the Grazing Land Conservation Initiative. This was the information, what it was all about, the effects, the impacts, why it was needed, the purpose, what the goals were, the land treatment needs, and all that determined by the members of the committee. And then they developed the treatment needs and effects and impacts and their strategic plan. That was what they were trying to develop during the first two meetings, and it didn't happen. And so they got me on board and said, make us work. I said, okay, we got to get through. We're tired of having this meeting to not get anything done. So they already had a tour schedule the first day at the farm that morning, so we didn't start this meeting until 1 p.m. And I did what they told me. We worked. We didn't adjourn until 1:30 a.m. the next morning with instructions to be back here by 8 a.m. because everybody's leaving out at 11 on airplanes. And during that marathon meeting, these were developed. And what they basically needed the most help on was unity. being about the same thing. Okay? Dairy industry, they want to make more pounds of milk. Beef industry wants to make more pounds of beef per acre. You know, the sheep industry is interested in lamb and wool. And, you know, Farm Bureau got a whole set of cases. Anyway, so everybody was always trying to work their stuff in individual. And we got around to saying, okay, it's not about your final product, it's about what you need to get help for that, and that's technical assistance. And I likened it to having a church group or social group. You want to give them all a gift, and you want to give them the same gift, but you still want to make it personal. And so you buy a little crystal dish, and you put it in a little box, and this guy that really likes cattle, you wrap it with cattle-colored paper, Hereford or Angus or whatever, a little bit. You know, this one that's a golfer, you put a golf tee and all that, but everybody's got the same thing inside that box as that little crystal dish. And the lady that really likes sewing, she's got a bow and some new needles or whatever on top of hers. So they're amazed when they open it up, and they all get the same crystal dish. But they all get to use that dish for something different. You know, somebody may put needles in it. Somebody may put marbles in it. Somebody may put their keys in it. Somebody may put candy for the grandkids. But it's all the same thing. All right, so I said, that dish represents technical assistance. That's what we want your package to be, is about technical assistance. They didn't have to be government employees, but at that time, that's where they looked to get that. And are we getting towards the end? Oh, I'm about halfway done. Okay, good. Because I've jumped all over the place here on my sheet. But back at that meeting, from the very formation of that, John Merrill from Texas served on that committee. I had the honor and privilege of speaking at his services in Fort Worth last May when he passed. But even greater than that, I had the chance to talk to him in his home 4 months before he did pass. And he was still John Merrill. Still, he was frail, but he still had a smile on his face. And that was a dedicated man, dedicated to good technical assistance for farmers and ranchers out on the land to get conservation applied and make their lives better. Well, at that committee meeting, I noticed John, he listened very carefully to every individual's concerns and ideas. And if you knew John Merrill, he would be leaning forward, Bob, and he might have a pen close or something. He might jot a note, but he was watching intently to catch all the meanings of your words. And then when the dairyman talked, he did the same thing, or the person from Soil Conservation Group, he did the same thing. Well, he was there to represent the cattle industry, and he spoke eloquently from the cattle industry's point of view, but he knew to make this thing work, compromise was necessary to make the GLCI a reality. And so he really led the way in that meeting to make these things happen. And he got all the cattle industry's points in the plan, but he was very considerate of others. And that's what I see this group being. We've got quite a diversity of people, you know, not just people diversity, but we got diversity of operations, of sizes of operations, of locations in the country. And I'm going to run out of time here in a minute. But he showed me how to make that kind of thing happen. And that's when I come up with the idea of the candy bowl. And so we got to get off of the pounds of milk and off the pounds of beef and off of the trout in the stream, and we got to talk about something that's abstract, but then they can apply. So after 2 years of developing the policy documents, I get a call from John Merrill and says, Larry, we need something in the next farm bill. Can you write a draft? Well, a government employee is not supposed to write legislation, but I had pretty good cover with John Merrill and the committee, so I did. I wrote the first draft. John liked it so much He liked it 7 different times while I got to edit it different, and back and forth until we come up with the final one. And then the key thing happened that, well, I moved to Fort Worth and I could no longer be the committee coordinator because of my new supervisor didn't want me doing that. He wanted me doing something else. But the key thing that happened after that is that Greg Early with NCA had gotten it, and they took it to Washington, D.C., and started walking the halls of Congress time and time again. They would go up there and they'd pair up in teams. Pete Jackson was always with Bud Purdy, and they'd go off and they'd be talking old times and everything in the world that happened back then and during the day. But then they'd walk up to somewhere and Bud Purdy would know that congressman or that senator they were fixing to talk to. And wherever you're going with GLC now, whether it's going to be looking for grants for funding of technical assistance from private sources, or whether it's going to still try to get some from NRCS, which I don't really recommend myself. I don't think they're equipped to do the job like they were at one time. But wherever you're going to go, if you need to get legislation to get grant money set up, y'all are going to have to start walking those halls. You're going to have to go with the people that you know, your local representative. They may not even be on the ag committee, but you get with them and say, who can you help us with? We're here, and just keep bugging them. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. And I don't know how many times that group went to D.C. I was there a number of times with them, but I didn't dare go on the Hill as a government employee. But I stayed at the hotel, and when we talked about it when they got back. But that was the most exciting time of my life, is to get to play the part that I played in the 1996 Farm Bill and the conservation of private grazing lands, which led to where we are today. It finally got, written and authorized. They authorized $60 million, but as y'all know, authorizing and appropriating are two different things. Mm-hmm. And so now you're working on trying to get a hold of some of that to do the things you want to do. Over the intervening years, many states developed a committee, many didn't. But one thing about it that happened is when they added the eastern states and the pasture land management and grazed forest and all that, it gave an emphasis, and it gave the local or the state, this national committee, some leverage over the state cons. Look, we got this problem. We've noticed it. You don't even have a state specialist. Well, most of the states now either have a state rangeland specialist, or they've got a state pasture specialist. And so that's a good thing that happened. They began to get some training done back then and put together some various conferences. Now the Grazing Land Conservation Initiative several years ago got the new name, National Grazing Land Coalition. And this might not be very popular, but I really don't like that name. I like what you had, at least part of it. Should have never taken the word conservation out of this group, because that's what binds you together. That is that crystal dish inside. That's what each of you want, whether it's in Montana on rangelands, or it's in Alabama on pasture lands, or it's in New York. Wherever it is, that's what you want. And so it's about conservation. And because of conservation, you get the economic benefits, you get the social stability, you get the clean water, you get all of that. So I've gone probably beyond where I needed to go, said a lot of stuff that was not on this paper, and skipped a lot of stuff that was on this paper. But I'm telling you, my wife, she just loves it when I start digging around and I say, look what I found. And she goes, yeah, have you seen all that mildew on this side over here? I said, it doesn't matter. It's what's in it that counts. So you've still got them too, don't you?
I'd like to make a comment too, and I got another meeting at 4:30, but
Okay.
with your permission, then, as being one of the founding fathers, I'm Bob Lee from Montana, but over the years, we have got a lot of traction, taking care of that. You talk about unity, it all comes down to grass. What's on the ground, what makes us what we are.
Yep.
Come a long, long ways, but I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize each and every one of you guys as being a chapter in that book.
Exactly.
Every one of you guys have got GLCI or GLC wardens today because of the chapters you've written, how you participated in grazing land management, and encourage conservation, if you would. And you know what? That's why that book is such a good read. So just wanted to throw that out there. And Larry, thank you. Thank you for your documentation.
Thank you. And there were a lot of other people, but today that have gone on to different things or passed on. And so it's a long legacy over 30 years.
Well, being able to participate is not all bad.
That's right.
Let's give him a round of applause. Wait, they may have a question. We can take a couple of questions if anyone have a question for Larry. No questions? Very good.
Thank you.
Let's give him another round of applause.